Welcome to Economics Happy Hour. My name's Matt.
And my name is Jadrian.
And we are thrilled to be joined by Dan Kuester. Dan, thanks for being here.
Love to be here. Always like to talk about the things we're doing at Kansas State and in the economics discipline. And I was checking out some of the videos earlier today. I think you all have a hit on your hands. So,
well, thank you. We don't bring people on who think it's going to be terrible, but no, I appreciate that. Appreciate you checking us out, and we're excited for today. We are in Atlanta still, so those who watched or listened to the episode 2 weeks ago, it's 2 weeks for you. It's about 20 minutes for us, and we're still in the Pour Tap Room, Midtown Atlanta, that they're kind enough to host us. For those watching on YouTube, you see the "Wish You Were Beer" sign behind us. Wonderful that they were hosting us. And Jadrian, I'm going to hand the mic over as we have a sponsor to thank.
Yeah, so it's we are incredibly thankful that Pour Tap Room has allowed us some space and allowed us to annoy them with our studio audience, which has now grown to 5 people compared to 20 minutes ago. You may have heard a woo, but we don't know. We can't tell you. They wooed. That's all you need to know. So very thankful for Pour Tap Room, but we are also thankful for David Wilson, who is a graduate student at Georgia Tech. He came to C-Tree Conference as well, and then as a parting gift, he gave us some gift cards to pay for our beer today. And so in honor of David sponsoring our 2 beers, Matt and I are actually drinking a beer straight out of Atlanta made for Georgia Tech students. It is called Ale of an Engineer, and it is a cream ale by New Realm Brewery. So that's our beer. Thanks to David. We appreciate it.
And Dan, what are you drinking here?
it is a Put Me In Kolsch, and I am not aware of the brewer, but it's rather tasty.
Cool. Well, gentlemen, cheers.
Cheers.
So when Jadrian and I spoke about having Dan on, we came up with about 4 different things we were going to talk to him about. But in the interest of time, we kind of settled on one that we think is actually really fascinating and we think the listeners will love. And by the title, if you saw talking about inflation or whatever, however the title is tweaked here. Dan is educator at Kansas State. Why don't I actually let you do a full bio before we dive into what you do? I know you're at K-State, but share a little bit more with the audience.
Yeah, I'm the director of undergraduate studies, and I've held that position for about 16 years. I've been at Kansas State 20 years, and also for about 16 years I've been the Roger Trineri Endowed Chair in Economic Education. And Roger was a wonderful professor at K-State who taught probably 15,000 students over 35 years, and unfortunately had ALS. And while he was still with us, a lot of his former students and alumni wanted to honor him, and he hired me, so it meant a lot to me for a number of reasons to get that position. And I have a really unique position in our field, and one of the charges of that position is student engagement and having a sense of belonging for our majors, and that's what we try to do. As I'm the faculty sponsor to the economics club and again the DUS, so I meet with all of our majors. We have a wonderful advisor who also meets with our majors, and I think we've improved our student experience quite a bit over the years at K-State.
That's awesome. And if any Susquehanna graduates or people out of Susquehanna, you may remember we had Dan out. I won't mention the title of the talk as we'd give away a little bit of our pop culture discussion at the end. Came to campus. I was also fortunate enough to go out to K-State and see some of the great things Dan was doing with his students, so that was fantastic. So inflation. The most commonly cited metric is what's known as the Consumer Price Index. And Jadrian and I, we get made fun of, including by somebody in our audience, Mike Enns, whenever we try to talk macro. But this is actually one I feel like I have a better grasp on than most. So the Consumer Price Index for inflation takes a basket of goods and tracks the basket over time, and looks at, okay, what percentage might be spent on housing and how is housing changing? What percentage might be on food and how much are food prices changing? And kind of calculates it out, and that's your CPI. The reasonably straightforward. There are certainly flaws with any potential index and ways that they try to correct it, but it's certainly one of the most common. So, Dan, you've done a great spin with students on this. Can you share a little bit about what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. As we gather back for the Econ Club, first meeting of the semester, we do an ice cream social. We make our own ice cream at Call Hall on campus, and it's kind of a common thing for a lot of clubs to do. And then we start to recruit for people to gather data for our student price index. And we first gathered that data in 2002. This precedes me. I didn't invent it. I arrived at K-State in 2004. And we collect a bundle of goods that at least initially was designed to mimic the CPI as best we can, with obviously a higher weight on tuition than they would do. And we pair students up. We have them go collect data. They report the data to our club vice president, who then puts together a press release committee. They meet with me. We write the press release, and typically we get on the local radio. We've been on the local television a few times, and certainly the newspapers cover it. The college paper, the Manhattan Mercury, Topeka Capital Journal, sometimes the Kansas City Star. We made USA Today back in the day, but that's been a while. We made CNN and USA Today, but that was when we first started, so that preceded me, unfortunately. But yeah, it's a really fun project, and we're pretty thoughtful about what we do, and we use it as a teaching tool in our principals, more macro classes, obviously.
So I absolutely love this idea, and I've talked to Dan about it over and over and over again. And so I always love to talk to Dan about it, because I don't think he realizes how cool it is to everyone else. So I'm going to echo that Dan does some incredible things with his students of just getting them engaged. Dan, one of the things we've talked about before is like inflation broadly is about what is impacting sort of the entire country, and that people respond differently to inflation based on their income, where they're living, sort of personal percentages versus what the BLS does. Can you share a little bit more about the student price index in the sense of like what measures, you mentioned tuition, but like what other measures might impact a student's price index versus that you wouldn't normally think about like in a regular CPI? So what are some of the components of the student basket?
Right. So I can go a lot of different directions with that. I'll take a sidebar and then remind me to come back. Our tuition's 32% of the index, and as many schools experienced after the Great Recession, we had some pretty high tuition hikes. And one year, and everyone's gone long enough, I think I could state this publicly. One year, we wondered why the university was not releasing our press release. And the president kind of said, no, like your SBI is too high, and you wrote that it's because tuition was up 12 or 15% in the press release. And so from that point forward, I have not gone through K-State media for any of our releases. I directly contact the local papers and things of that nature. But generally speaking, I'll answer your question directly, and then there's a thing or two I could talk about. The housing market in Manhattan, Kansas is rather unique relative to the nation. We actually have lower variance in prices than what you saw with the Great Recession, and even what we've seen more recently, that you don't get a lot of people buying homes for reasons other than primary residence. But the products we do put together, we really get student engagement for that. But beer and pizza kind of gets people's attention. Movie tickets, ICAT tickets, which is the sports pass, internet. Gosh, now I'm drawing a blank on a few of these. I mean, groceries and gas are big ones. Oh, you've got it for me here. Yeah, of course. Again, my vision's so poor that I don't know how much that helps. But yeah, that's most of them. And then we introduced Greek housing a few years ago because the data source became available, and we tried it. We've minimized, or we cut the weight in half of textbooks in recent years because so many classes no longer require them. And so everything we do may seem haphazard, but we have a committee, we get together, we discuss it, and we try to be serious economists with it. We try to be very thoughtful about every change we make with the SBI.
Yeah, echoing what Jadrian said, I think there's two key things that I just love about this. First is providing this information to the public. It's just kind of cool. It's a cool story. And to say we went on CNN once, but it's been a while, or USA Today once. I mean, this is a student project. Student projects don't go on CNN or USA Today. That's amazing. But then what an amazing learning experience for the students. I mean, it's one thing to try to teach, hey, here's how we construct the CPI. These students will never have an issue with that, right? Like they would always know exactly what's happening with that. So I think that's pretty truly amazing.
So I do have a follow-up question. Now that I'm thinking about it, now that you said you cut stuff and move stuff around, which makes perfect sense, is there something from the old 2004, 2005 index that no longer is even counted in your index? So I was trying to think of like, are there parts of being a student that I no longer do, right? So maybe maybe they used to charge for bus tickets, but now buses are free. Is there something like that?
I don't know if this was there in 2005, but when it was started, long distance phone calls at one point were a thing. I don't know if that was in or if there's anything else.
I don't know of anything we've omitted. Some of the bars have gone out of business, and so we've had to replace our beer pricing. Yeah, so we've had folks kind of lose their way, and that's pretty typical in a college town. I guess the closest thing again is we cut the weight of textbooks in half, and we have introduced a number of products. But yeah, and I mentioned yesterday, we try to be thoughtful about the quality bias. And I thought, okay, as we did this, and I did tweak things a little bit when I took over from Mike Oldfather, who was the previous Econ Club advisor, I thought movie tickets would always be immune from a quality bias. And now in Manhattan, Kansas, our movie experience is much better, at least twice as good as it was in 2004. And I mentioned that to the students. It's like, we want to be we have ground beef and we have soda pop and we have gas. And I mean, those things are what they are. Maybe eventually the electronic vehicles have not been too big in Manhattan, Kansas yet. So we're still got a few years with our bundle. But yeah, when you get something that you think, okay, this is going to be the same experience throughout time, and it becomes quite a bit better. It's kind of a unique teaching opportunity.
So I just thought of one. I'm curious if this is one. A big difference between now and then was Netflix. So back then it would have been the DVD subscription version, and now it's fully streaming. The price is not that big of a difference between the two, but thinking but it's essentially the same as the movies.
Right.
Your quality of that subscription is very different from what you used to get.
It's really a different product, and you have the nice experience there that didn't used to exist, and we never did do Netflix. We've done internet, and that's pretty flat. Over time, and it's just kind of interesting to see some of the prices that dropped during COVID and kind of gradually came back, and there's just a lot of different. It's a limited set of data. We try to be very thoughtful about it, but I think it does tell a pretty complete picture.
So, and I stepped away to thank some of our visitors as they walked out. So if you ask this, apologize.
We have our sponsor here.
Hey, that's awesome. He missed it by just a moment. But new products are added, and one of the key components of the CPI bias is new product bias. The idea that how much better off are we today because the iPhone exists,
right,
when it literally had a price of infinity in 2006. It was an infinite price. The richest person in the world couldn't own it. And then it comes out and for just $600 or however much it was. How does new product bias handled by your students?
Well, Matt, you probably don't know this. That's the exact example I give for quality bias in class. I have a first generation iPod that I put up on the screen and show and compare to the iPhone, which is not the same product whatsoever, but to some degree, the CPI has a hard time making that differentiation. Again, I would go back to, we were pretty thoughtful in the first place with the things we put out there are not supposed to change over time. And that was by design. We didn't want big screen TVs and, iPhones even, things that are really going to change year to year to year. A pizza's pretty much a pizza, a beer's pretty much a beer. The basketball team may get better and worse, but the ticket is the same experience for the year, and that's by design. And I think it's a good feature of the SPI.
Right. So I looked this up while Dan was talking because he mentioned in the 2020 the pandemic student price index, things fell. So I decided to look it up because I was very curious, like how much they fell by. According to the Kansas State Student Price Index, textbook prices declined about 13.8%, groceries 3%, gasoline 20%. I think a lot of us remember just how cheap gasoline was in 2020. And leisure items like beer 16%, pizza 6%, movie prices 13%. And I think that's one of those really neat opportunities. I'm going to say, I think I've said this before for macro stuff. One of the problems is the best time to teach macro is the worst time for people. So to be able to talk about like this big change around a recession, and then also trying to say like there's all this other stuff going on, but like we can still measure economic activity as well. And so with that reduction in economic activity lines up exactly what we would think. People aren't driving, they're not going out to pizza shops, they're not drinking as much, they're not in Manhattan, Kansas as they were before.
Exactly.
Demand decreases, price fall. How does that change the CPI? So I wanted to make sure I shared that. It was so interesting, and I'll put it in the show notes too.
Appreciate that, Jadrian. Yeah, we again, it was like the ultimate time to be teaching macro, that, and I'm old enough, the Great Recession also. But, people were more interested, but they were also rather unhappy. And we don't necessarily want our business to be that good, but make hay while the sun's shining, I suppose. Well, that was a good year in terms of also, I know, Matt, you're on the radio when I go see you. You're out there in the media a lot, but we have had, that was a year we were on the local NBC affiliate, and we were again the following year, and those are some of my favorite things about the SPI is that typically the vice president can get out there and really have a nice thing for their resume, honestly.
Yeah, for a student who gets to do that, I mean, it's kind of one of those, say, once in a lifetime kind of experiences. That might be overstating it, but when a parent sends their kid off to college, speaking from a parent's perspective, you never expect that they're going to do something where they're going to be on a news interview, right? Like that kind of stuff. It's just got to be such a highlight of an education. So it's pretty amazing. I'm curious if are there any other competing, I say competing because you're not really competing, but college price indices in the U.S. or around the world? Or?
There are a few out there. At one point, I tried to do an article that said we were the longest running continuous price index, and someone got very angry about it and pointed out something from the 1990s that I don't think is continuous, but I probably shouldn't bring it up. They may try and come hunt me down again. I know they were doing one at Virginia Tech at one point. I guess maybe not anymore. So I think some of them come and go. I do see them on occasion, but I'm not aware of very many. I'll say that. I will, while you were mentioning the media, I'll send you the photo of maybe you could fit it in somewhere, where we were on K-Man Radio, myself, Brandon Peoples, the news director there, and Emily Thornton, my vice president, who was amazing. She just graduated, has a great job at Koch Industries, and I took a random selfie, and we put it up on our webpage because it was pretty good. So she was excited, I was excited. It was fun.
I can say it's the longest running continuous college price index, and if somebody disagrees, please chime in. We will give you a shout out, and we will give you credit. If you have one that's longer, please let us know. We'd be actually fascinated to know. I mean, we're not competing here I'm not competing. I really don't think it's a competition thing.
I did not write it as a boo on you kind of thing, and it was this referee was like, you don't know what you're talking about. I was like, well, I guess I don't.
How could you not prove what you don't know? How dare you?
I did a review. I tried. It's just whoever it was not very well promoted, in my opinion, because I couldn't find it.
So we've talked a lot about just the things that Dan does, and I think one of the things that's interesting, and Dan, you can probably give the full numbers, but I want to talk about some of the other stuff you do with your students, because it's just, I wish I had the time, the energy, the money to do the stuff that you're doing, because it's so cool. Can you share a little bit about like how big is the Kansas State economics major? And then I think one of the things that's really fun that you do is I've heard you talk about the gambling with your students, but not for money, which is a very important component. Are you willing? Are you comfortable talking about the?
I'm trying to recall that actually.
I remember something he didn't say.
Yeah.
Any other things you do with your students that are sort of unique, or you think are unique?
I don't. We have a really active econ club again. and we do a lot of different things, including we do have poker nights with the Econ Club. Yeah, and those are for so you're right. Those are for prizes. The students get they seem to get a special joy out of beating me. I broke a card one time. I didn't mean to. I just flipped it, and that got a lot of attention when the card shattered. They were my cards, so what difference does it make? So we do have poker nights. We have bowling nights. We have K-State watch parties. We will have a debate watch party. I think there'll be one during the academic year, and it worked well in 2016 and 2020. We have very polite students, so I think we can all get together and watch the presidential debate and have that work out pretty well. We have speakers at least once a month, and we do have a big trip every year. This year was Chicago. Other recent trips, mostly it's Dallas, Chicago, and DC is kind of our loop that we've been doing, and we get a lot of really good experiences there with industry leaders, people from Fannie Mae. I've got an alum there, and World Bank, IMF. Just a lot of different Federal Reserves. Obviously, they're great. I was trying to recruit Scott Walla yesterday to come to Manhattan. I don't know if I'm going to be successful with that or not. They have a limited ability to do that now, but we had Mark Bales out, who was formerly in Scott's position at the St. Louis Fed pre-COVID, and that was really amazing. So it's just a matter of, and getting back to what you're talking about, I mean, that's the Trinary chair. The whole charge was, and when I was hired even as an instructor initially, there was a real lack of camaraderie amongst our majors. Tom Thomas, who hired me, told me, he said, look, our majors are very upset. And we have about 80 majors now, I think 80, 85, so we're down from where we've been. We have a bright, new, shiny business school that is tough to compete with, but we get a lot of folks that do dual majors there, and I think they do a really nice job in the business school. But yeah, that's really my charge, is to try to get the econ major out there and get it in front of people, and then, clarify misconceptions that we all know that a lot of people have about economics.
Jadrian, any more questions for Dan before we go to our pop culture segment? So we always like to close by thinking about pop culture, and figured maybe we would center on a very special pop culture topic, a theme. And Dan has created or co-created the Economics of the Office website, which, if you have not seen this website, it's truly fantastic. You get great education by watching The Office. Maybe we'll go through. I think Jadrian might know it well enough. I'm hoping that this question won't throw him off, but maybe the favorite. Why don't you actually first start about how the project came about, and then I'd love to get the favorite clip from each of you, and I'll share one of my favorites from there as well.
Sure. So the project really came about organically, and I let me mention a couple. I know you probably let us promote at the end, but I will say I have an article coming out in the Journal of Economic Teaching about running an economics club. If anyone out there wants help putting together an SPI on your campus, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to send all my Excel. It's a very easy, from my perspective, it's not a difficult thing to implement. And so we're trying to promote that as much as we can for anyone that wants to take that on for your econ club or student organization. Literally, the Economics of the Office website started with me being a fan to the nth degree of The Office, recording it every week, and bringing the videotape to class very frequently, setting it up and playing a clip in the middle of the lecture and saying, this is an example of increase in demand, decrease in demand, whatever it might be. So that was very primitive. And then I was able to get the library to put them on, electronic, on flash drives, or at least where it was very easy to do. And then Chris Jadrian, who's one of our graduate students, is very good with tech and things like that. And then Dirk Mateer obviously has done so many of these projects with Jadrian and other folks. I enlisted him saying, look, I don't know how to get stuff published. I'm not really in that world. And he had some clips also. I would say the majority of the clips came from me. And he really helped navigate how to put the thing together and make it presentable and that's the key. Like, you're not going to get users if it looks bad. I mean, I was on the econ media library the other day. In the middle of my lecture, I went to it and searched it while I wasn't on this. And then all the examples were South Park, and I was like, I better vet this. I'm not going to show it live in class. But that econ media library, I use that a lot as well. There's just a number of resources out there. And it's just, we have a passionate community, I think. I know we do. I mean, I love going to this conference. I love meeting, and people are here watching. Yeah. And people are not, it's not like super competitive like you might get in some fields. I mean, people work together, they build each other up, and I love this community, and I'm glad that the office website, I think, is a really valuable contribution to it. So it's one of those things that started small and it built up really nicely. I will say, if you want to link the video, I'm trying to get more views. K-State did a 2-minute video on my class that we use it in there, and that'll get the point across better than I can by speaking.
Well, 100% we'll link it.
Favorite video?
Favorite video? Oh, boy, that's like picking a... I don't have children.
I can go mine if you need time.
I'll say the one that came to mind, and I may correct myself later. I really like the garage sale video because I love it's based off the One Red Paperclip TED Talk, and it shows the gains from trade. And it's like a 7-minute video, and I will show that in pieces throughout a 50-minute lecture. And at the end, I will have the students turn in who won and who lost because of trade. And some people will say Dwight lost, but it was a mutually agreed upon beneficial trade. So I really want to get this across that they both won. I copy that with, again, something that Dirk had me do, where we do trading the first day of class. I give away a bunch of knickknacks and have people measure how much they like it before we allow trade, and then after trade. And I say, well, what if I charged you $5 to make these trades? We'd kill all your benefits, right? And so, I want to have very simple overriding themes for that principles of macro class, particularly the first 5 or 6 weeks. And trade is good. Mutually beneficial trade helps both parties. I really like that, and so this kind of brings it home, and it's cute at the end with Jim with the trees. I shouldn't give it away, but yeah.
You want to go?
You said you were ready.
Oh, yeah, I was saying you gotta.
I have 2 or 3 that I could pick out. But
Okay,
I've got one.
Matt needs to think about it a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay, so I will say I have 2, but I'll pick one. I think is my favorite one. So there are, as far as I know, I think there's 2 clips that I show in class, but I feel like I have to pick the one clip that I show twice because that means it must be the best clip that I have. I love, one of the things I absolutely love about just teaching economics, so I teach principles of micro, is that you can use the same clip to cover multiple topics. And that, I think, when I do that with the students, you could see them go, okay, it's a way of thinking. It's not just one example. So for mine, it's the Princess Unicorn dolls.
Yeah.
I show it very early on when I'm doing demand shifters, and I'm like, look, changing expectations. Dwight is going to buy all these dolls because he knows people want it later, so he wants it now. And so it's a very good sort of demand example, and they get it, they understand expectations, and then weeks later, when I cover market structures, I come back and I talk about monopolies, perfect competition, and I talk about owning a scarce resource. And I go, what Dwight is doing is trying to become a monopoly, be the only one holding Princess Unicorn dolls. And then the nice part is I show the second part of the clip where he's selling it at a much higher profit. And so I kind of talk about this idea of restricting output, raising prices. It links up great. And then that's the moment where I can say, look, this is the same clip I showed you 8 weeks ago. Economics is just a way of thinking. You can apply different economic concepts to the exact same story over and over.
And I almost made you reconsider, because that was the other one I was thinking about. I love the elasticity coefficient of that too. You can be like, here's perfectly inelastic supply, and yes, in the short run it's perfectly inelastic, and that's the relevant time frame in that video.
Yeah, I was looking up. I was like, oh, Jadrian's going to say the one I was going to say, but you didn't actually. My favorite's the title's broke on it on this episode. It's the
accountant.
Yeah, so
that was my other
fixed cost pricing model.
It's an unbelievable. And where else do you find a description in media of fixed costs versus variable costs? It's Michael Scott thinks if they keep growing, they'll become profitable because he thinks they have, it's all fixed costs. And the guys know as you produce more, you lose more. And it literally says you're thinking a fixed cost pricing model on the thing. And of course they do it in a humorous way, and Michael Scott says crunch the numbers, and the guy goes crunch. And it's just a great clip. We'll throw all of these into the description for you, but it's that, and there's an extra 40 for those who aren't familiar.
Absolutely.
Everybody.
Yeah.
But
we continue to add occasionally. People come up with ideas, send them to us. We'll give you full credit. One of Lee Koppick's students sent one in on rent-seeking behavior a few years ago, where Michael is deciding whether the office gets copiers or chairs, and or furniture. I guess it is chairs. And no one works that entire day. They just spend their time trying to win Michael's favor. And so principal agent problem. It's a pretty cool one. And so we're trying to keep it fresh. Students seem to still like it. I don't feel like I'm just the guy that's putting black and white movies up there and people are wondering what this old guy's up to. So I hope that doesn't happen anytime soon.
We did a principal agent episode, and now I'm feeling like really stupid that neither of us mentioned that clip for the media of the principal agent. But Dan, any last kind of words of wisdom for the audience before we conclude?
I think I made the points I wanted to make really well. I mean, I'm very blessed. I love being at Kansas State. We have great students that are wonderful to work with, and I don't feel like I'm working most of the time. It's a really and you come to these conferences and you're surrounded by people that are passionate about the discipline, and it's a good recharge for everybody. And I know how passionate you guys are. I really appreciate you having me on. And anybody that has questions about any of this, I'm DD Kuester on Twitter, X, Twitter, or whatever, and you can find my email. And I've sent the Excel file to a number of people that have started SPIs on their campus. And I will say it's not going to hold up to if the Federal Reserve looks at it and says, well, you overweight this part. That's not the people have studied that, and I'm not going to say it's not important, but if there's a consistent kind of scientific process and it makes sense to the students and it's reasonable, I think that's great. And that's all we're really doing here. We're not reinventing the wheel. So, yeah, thanks.
And most importantly, how was the beer?
It's good. It's a good Kolsch. That's a good Kolsch.
Thanks again to David Wilson for our beverages here today. And Dan, thanks for being on. Until the next video. Cheers.
Hey.